My topic is about the role of tobacco farmers in the context of the tobacco tax advocacy in the Philippines. And while I will focus on how the role of farmers was, I would also like to give a context of that particular experience we had in increasing the tobacco tax. So, how do I use this?
The green one.
Okay, there you are. So, the context. In 2012, the Philippine government, together with civil society, launched a campaign to dramatically increase tobacco taxes, as well as to introduce other tax reforms related to tobacco and alcohol. And these were reforms badly needed for so many years, 15 years, nothing was happening, but we got that opportunity in 2012. And we were quite successful in pushing for a higher tobacco tax. The tobacco industry called it a very disruptive tax that was introduced to be, for example, the price of tobacco for the lowest price cigarette increased from 2.72 pesos to 30 pesos by 2018. So that's a very big increase, almost an increase of more than 14 times. Okay. Well, what do you call this? The slide is too big, but I just want to show in this slide what the main features of the reform were in 2012. We were able to move to a single tax, that is a unitary tax regardless of the price of the tobacco. We were able to get a very significant increase in tobacco rates, and we were able to adjust the tax rate to inflation. That is to say that in perpetuity, the tobacco tax rate would increase every year to adjust to inflation, equivalent to about 4% per year after 2018. We were able to remove the protection given to what we call the legacy brands. They were protected in the sense that their tax rates were frozen. Moreover, the law had a provision on the earmarking of the incremental revenue from the tobacco and from the tobacco taxes. The bulk of the revenue, of the incremental revenue, till now goes to health, but a certain portion, that red slice, goes to the farmers. A portion of the incremental fund goes to alternative livelihood and safety nets of tobacco farmers and workers. So that's the whole context. But the question is, there you are. That's the way to do it. The main features of the reform, okay? Significant tax increase, the adjustment to inflation, single tax rate, the removal of protection to legacy brands, and plus the earmarking for universal health, almost 85%, and about 15% going to alternative livelihood of tobacco farmers, safety nets too, for tobacco farmers and workers. Now, the question is, how did the tobacco, but by the way, after that reform in 2012, this 2018, we were again able to push for another increase, a moderate increase, it's still significant, of equivalent to about 16% increase in the tobacco tax. Now, the question is, how were the tobacco farmers involved? So we have to ask the right questions, and here are the questions that we asked when we did that advocacy. First, are the tobacco farmers our friends or allies, or are they our opponents in fighting for the tobacco tax reform? Remember that the tobacco farmers depend on their income, on their livelihood on tobacco farming. So a tax on tobacco will logically affect their livelihood, will affect their income. So we also have to ask that question, how can we win them over, given that they depend on tobacco products, on tobacco farming for their livelihood. A related question then is, what will be the impact on tobacco farmers of a huge increase in tobacco taxes? Again, as background, I did mention that the increase in tobacco tax rates was really, really very high. And the third question is, how will we support the farmers given that there can be a disruption in their livelihood arising from the rise in tobacco taxes? To answer these questions, we must know, we had to know what the real situation of the farmers was. What was their actual situation? And that entailed solid research. We had to do the research. We had to do field work. We had to do the survey. We had to gather both primary and secondary materials. And the research necessarily had to include knowing the attributes of our farmers. And related to that, we also have to grapple with the issues on the political economy and the economics of tobacco itself. So our concern now goes beyond the economics of taxation. We also have to know more about agriculture, about tobacco production, and the political economy. And that research has to continue. It just cannot be before the tobacco tax. We have to monitor what the implementation. So it's looking for outcomes before the implementation of the tax and after the implementation of the tax. And some of the findings are, the critical findings, and this is an insight we got in our research and in our field work, and I noticed that this insight is also common in other countries as well. For example, just had a talk with Valentina from Indonesia, and the point here is the tobacco farmer is first and foremost a farmer, which is to say that he or she can ship from one crop to another. So in a way, it is inaccurate to say, or it is static to say that the tobacco farmer, to say that the tobacco farmer is a tobacco farmer. It's better to view him or her as a farmer who can shift from one crop to another. The shifting of production or the choice of crop, of course, depends on different variables, including the price of the crop, the support that he or she gets, and other considerations. But that's an important point because that means that the farmer will not be permanently tied to tobacco production. Okay, so we also saw that the use of land for tobacco is mainly determined by inheritance, by tradition, and secondarily by the support from the industry. So the industry provides the support, like in Bangladesh or in India, the companies would provide access to credit, provide extension services, and the like. And it's also in that context that they become tied to tobacco production. But again, it gives us another insight. So long as government will intervene and provide those services or even benefits that the companies provide, then that would again create a new set of incentives for tobacco farmers to ship production. Okay. Another attribute here is the demographics, that, well, many of them are already aging, above 50 years old. They're quite literate, and they're dependent on the leaf buying companies via contractual arrangement. Okay. It has also been said that by earlier speakers that tobacco farming is very labor intensive and very backbreaking. And for exposed, we found that the tobacco farmers were not really affected by the increase in the tobacco tax. In fact, their incomes even increased after the tax reform, but more on that later. So from there, we can ask the question: Are they allies or enemies? The fear or perception is of farmers is their economic dislocation, that they will lose their source of income if the prices of cigarettes, the end product of tobacco, will increase, because that will result in lower production. But it has been shown, and I can move a little forward. Sorry. So it's not. Anyhow, even without the slide, can I just continue? The point about the fear of economic dislocation was shown to be false. It was but a fear, because in the end we have to take note that cigarette is an inelastic product, which is to say that even if we increase the price of tobacco or a cigarette, the demand will fall, but the fall will not be that as steep, which can lead to a disruption in its production. It's inelastic because those who already smoke will continue to smoke, because cigarette is addictive. So that is the first point. In spite of the drop in the volume of production, the drop in the volume of production was not to the extent that it would kill a production of the tobacco farmers. The second is, there is an export market. So the tobacco farmers are producing inputs, the leaf, not only for the domestic market, and indeed there was a drop in the demand and in the production of cigarettes, but the export market continued to flourish. In fact, a bigger percentage of the production of tobacco farmers was for, and continues to be, for the export market. Okay. Another point about the question whether they are enemies or friends, we have to distinguish between the tobacco farmers being captured by the tobacco industry, and that's something subjective. That's in the term of the political science literature, that's called the subjective force. But we also have to look at the interest, the long-term interest, the objective interests of the tobacco farmers. So the issue of tobacco taxation serves them in terms of long-term gains for health, tax spending for development. And these are interests that serve not only the tobacco farmers, but the rest of society. Even then, we recognize that the farmers, some of them are organized by the tobacco industry, and in that context, they are captured. But we can identify and court the support of some tobacco farmers for our advocacy. So the impact of tobacco taxation then on farmers is, one, the need to provide the safety nets. Second, as I said, there is continued production because of the inelasticity of cigarettes. Then there's the production for export markets. Now, the support for farmers, that we ensured in the design of the law itself. First, there is that earmarking of funds, mainly for health, but a certain portion of the earmarking goes to the safety nets and to the alternative livelihood of farmers. And through the funds that we get from the tobacco tax, we can then create the conditions to introduce and develop viable crops and provide other conditions for farmers to shift production. And another important point is that this goes beyond the tobacco control program, but it is necessary for the whole of government to look at agriculture not as being crop oriented. So how can we increase production of tobacco, or how can we increase production of other crops? But the main goal of agriculture policy is how to improve, enhance the development outcomes. That is to say, how can we boost the income of farmers regardless of crop? How can we develop their capacities, again, regardless of the crop they use? So the orientation moves away from the tobacco production itself, but towards human development. That's it.